The flock descended like a living storm, 300 birds, maybe more, blacking out the sky above her pristine lawn. Margaret stood frozen on her doorstep, her citation pad clutched in trembling hands, as the cardinal she'd tried to poison last week landed on her mailbox and cocked its head. Behind it, the air filled with wings, and somewhere in that chaos I smiled. Because nature doesn't forget, and it sure as hell doesn't forgive. The first time I saw the cardinal, it was building a nest in the dogwood tree that straddled the property line between my backyard and Margaret Whitmore's immaculate fortress of suburban perfection. The bird was magnificent, crimson feathers catching the early morning light like brushstrokes of fire against the pale spring sky. I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee, watching it weave twigs and grass into something that looked like hope, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt something other than the hollow ache that had taken up residence in my chest. "Well, hello there," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. The cardinal paused, turned its head, and I could have sworn it looked right at me. Then it went back to work, unbothered, purposeful, building something, creating a home. I understood that feeling, or at least I was trying to. 6 months earlier, I'd signed the papers that ended my 23-year marriage to Derek. 6 months of living in this house alone, of sleeping on one side of a bed that suddenly felt infinite, of cooking dinner for one, and pretending I didn't hear the silence screaming at me from every room. The kids, Melissa and Jason, were grown and gone, building lives in cities I'd only seen in photographs. They called every Sunday like clockwork, voices bright with concern they tried to hide, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I'd made any friends yet. I always lied and said yes. But that morning, watching the cardinal work, I felt something shift. The dogwood tree was technically on the property line, but most of its branches reached toward my side. I'd planted it 12 years ago, back when Melissa was still in middle school, and we'd all worked together to dig the hole, mix the soil, and water it every evening that first summer. Derek had wanted to cut it down during the divorce proceedings, said it was an asset that needed to be divided fairly. The memory still made my jaw clench. In the end, my lawyer had argued that it was planted on my side of the original property line, and the judge had rolled his eyes and told Derek to pick his battles more wisely. Small victories. I spent the rest of that morning setting up my late grandmother's bird feeder, a beautiful copper thing with a patina that caught the light like old coins. I filled it with premium seed mix, the kind that cost twice as much at the specialty store but promised to attract cardinals, finches, and chickadees. Then I hung it from the dogwood's lowest branch, right where I could see it from my kitchen window. The cardinal appeared within an hour. It perched on the feeder's edge, elegant and cautious, its crest raised like a question mark. Then it began to eat, and I felt something warm bloom in my chest, something that might have been joy, or at least its distant cousin. I named him Romeo, after the way he seemed to dance around the feeder, performing for an invisible audience. By evening, he'd brought company. A female cardinal, brown with reddish tinges, subtler but no less beautiful. Juliet, I decided immediately. They fed together, side by side, and I stood at my window like a child watching Christmas morning unfold. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, Margaret Whitmore knocked on my door at 7:30 sharp. I'd met Margaret exactly twice since moving in. Once during a mandatory HOA meeting where she'd spent 45 minutes explaining the community standards regarding lawn maintenance, holiday decorations, and appropriate color palettes for exterior paint. The second time, she'd left a printed citation on my doorstep because my trash cans were visible from the street for approximately 4 hours longer than the acceptable window, outlined in Section 324 of the HOA bylaws. She was 62, her blonde hair helmet sprayed into submission, her pantsuit pressed to within an inch of its life. She had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes, the kind that said she was performing politeness while mentally calculating your violations. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice saccharine sweet and sharp as a razor blade. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I was in my bathrobe, my coffee still steaming on the kitchen counter, my hair definitely doing something that could only be described as post-divorce entropy. "Morning, Margaret," I said, trying for friendly. "What can I do for you?" She produced a folder from her oversized purse, because of course she had a folder, and opened it with the ceremony of a lawyer presenting evidence at trial. "I wanted to discuss a concern that's been brought to my attention," she said, "regarding your new bird feeder." I blinked, my bird feeder. Yes, she pulled out a photograph, an actual printed photograph of my dogwood tree with the copper feeder hanging from its branch. As HOA president, it's my responsibility to ensure all residents comply with our community aesthetic standards. Bird feeders, while charming, can attract unwanted wildlife, create noise disturbances, and, she paused for emphasis, leave droppings that diminish property values. I stared at her, then at the photograph, then back at her. You took a picture of my bird feeder. For documentation purposes. She said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Now, I'm not saying you need to remove it immediately, but I would strongly encourage you to reconsider. Several neighbors have already expressed concerns about the potential for. Which neighbors? She blinked, excuse me. Which neighbors complained about my bird feeder, the one I put up yesterday morning? A tiny crack appeared in her composed facade. That's confidential, Mrs. Patterson. HOA complaints are handled with discretion to prevent. So you're saying no one complained, you just don't like it? Her smile tightened. I'm saying that as a community we have standards that everyone agreed to when they purchased property here. If we allow bird feeders, what's next? Wind chimes, garden gnomes, pink flamingos. I thought about the ceramic gnome collection my mother had kept in her garden. The one Derek had always made fun of. The one I'd packed away after she died because I couldn't stand to look at them without crying. Margaret, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, the bird feeder stays. It's on my property, it's not violating any actual bylaw that I can see in the packet you gave everyone. Yes, I actually read it. And honestly, those birds are the first thing that's made me smile in 6 months. So unless you have a legal reason for me to take it down, I think we're done here. For a moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or anger wearing a mask. Then the smile snapped back into place, brighter and colder than before. I understand you're going through a difficult time, she said, her tone dripping with false compassion. Divorce is never easy, but that doesn't exempt you from community responsibility. I'll be adding this to the agenda for next month's HOA meeting. Have a blessed day. She turned and walked back to her house, the largest on the block, a colonial revival painted in historically appropriate colors with a lawn so perfect it looked photoshopped. Not a leaf out of place, not a flower blooming in the wrong season, not a single bird. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding with anger I hadn't felt in months. The anger felt good, it felt alive. Over the next 2 weeks, my backyard became a sanctuary. Romeo and Juliet were regulars now, arriving just after sunrise and often bringing friends. Blue jays with their punk rock crests, chickadees that looked like tiny businessmen in suits, finches in colors I didn't know existed outside of tropical postcards, even a pair of mourning doves that cooed to each other like they were sharing secrets. I started keeping a journal, noting which birds appeared at what times, what they seemed to prefer from the feeder. I bought a field guide and lost hours identifying species, learning their habits, their songs. I set up a comfortable chair by the kitchen window and drank my morning coffee there, watching the show unfold. For the first time since Derek left, I had something to look forward to, something that was mine. Melissa called on a Wednesday evening. "Mom, you sound different," she said, like, I don't know, lighter. "I got a bird feeder," I told her. She laughed, a bright, surprised sound. "A bird feeder, that's what's making you sound happy. You'd be surprised what birds can do for the soul." "Well, whatever works. I'm just glad to hear you sounding more like you." But Margaret wasn't finished. The citations started appearing the following Monday. Printed notices left in my mailbox, each one documenting a different violation. Notice of violation, excessive wildlife attraction creating noise disturbance, reported by multiple neighbors. Notice of violation, tree debris falling onto adjacent property, owner responsible for immediate cleanup. Notice of violation, potential health hazard from accumulated bird waste, requires professional remediation. I collected them all, a growing stack of passive-aggressive bureaucracy. I cleaned up every leaf that fell from the dogwood tree, even though it was spring and trees shed things. That's what they do. I hosed down my patio daily to remove any trace of droppings. I even bought a handheld decibel meter to prove the birds weren't louder than the neighbors' dogs or the landscaping crews that showed up every Tuesday. None of it mattered. Margaret started showing up at my property line with her phone, taking videos of the birds at the feeder. She'd stand there, perfectly still, recording for minutes at a time. When I came outside to ask what she was doing, she'd smile that terrible smile and say she was documenting the issue for the next HOA meeting. "This is harassment," I told her one afternoon, standing in my backyard with my arms crossed. "This is community stewardship," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "Someone has to maintain standards. Oh my, look at that mess." She pointed to 3 bird droppings on the patio stones between our properties. "That's going to stain if you don't clean it immediately." "Margaret, they're on my side of the property line." "But they'll blow onto my side. Everything affects everyone in a community, Mrs. Patterson. That's the point of having rules." I went inside before I said something I'd regret. But that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't taking the feeder down. I wasn't letting Margaret Whitmore turn my one source of joy into another battle. The next morning, I bought 2 more feeders. I hung one from the back porch, a beautiful glass hummingbird feeder filled with sugar water. The other was a suet cage, perfect for woodpeckers and nuthatches. I positioned them strategically, all clearly on my property, all visible from my kitchen window. The birds arrived in force. It was like I'd sent out invitations to an exclusive party. By noon, my backyard was a riot of color and sound. Cardinals and jays, finches and sparrows, even a pair of woodpeckers that hammered away at the suet with industrial determination. The hummingbirds appeared within hours, tiny jeweled helicopters that zipped around the feeder like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. I stood at my window with fresh coffee and smiled so wide my face hurt. Margaret appeared on her back deck at 12:47 p.m. I know because I checked my watch. She stood there for a full minute, her face cycling through expressions: surprise, disbelief, fury. Then she pulled out her phone and started recording again, her jaw set in a hard line. Let her, I thought, let her document every single bird. That afternoon, I went to the garden center and bought a bird bath, a beautiful stone one with intricate carvings around the rim. I set it up in the center of my backyard, filled it with fresh water, and watched as the birds discovered it within minutes. They splashed and preened, droplets catching the sunlight like diamonds. Romeo perched on the edge and dipped his beak in, then threw his head back like he was gargling champagne. Juliet joined him, and they bathed together, their feathers slicking against their bodies before they shook themselves dry in explosions of crimson and brown. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in years. Margaret's voice cut across the yard like a knife. "This is a formal warning, Mrs. Patterson." I turned to see her standing at the property line, one hand on her hip, the other pointing at my new bird bath. "Water features require prior approval from the HOA Architectural Committee," she shouted. "You'll be receiving an official citation in the mail." "It's a bird bath, Margaret, not a swimming pool." "It's a water feature. Section 732 clearly states that any permanent installation requiring water sourcing must be approved before installation. I fill it with a hose. It's not sourcing anything." Her face flushed red. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think you can just ignore the rules everyone else follows. This is exactly the kind of entitled behavior that destroys communities." I took a step toward the property line, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "The only thing destroying this community is you, Margaret. You with your citations and your rules and your need to control every single thing everyone does. These birds, they're the best thing that's happened to me all year. And if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with whatever God you pray to, because I'm done listening to you." For a moment, just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something raw underneath, something that might have been pain or loneliness or rage so deep it had nowhere else to go. Then it was gone, buried under layers of pressed linen and hairspray. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "I promise you that." She turned and walked back to her house, her posture military straight, every step deliberate. I stood in my yard, surrounded by birds, and realized I was shaking. But I wasn't backing down. The first dead bird appeared 3 days later. I found it lying beneath the dogwood tree, its body still and perfect except for the unnatural angle of its neck. Not Romeo, thank God, but a smaller sparrow, its brown feathers dull in the morning light. I buried it in the garden, my hands trembling as I dug the small hole. Birds died, it happened. Natural causes, predators, accidents, I tried not to think about it. The second bird appeared the next morning. A finch this time, lying on the patio stones, also with a broken neck. Then 2 more the day after that. By the end of the week, I'd buried 7 birds. I started checking the feeders compulsively, examining the seed for anything unusual. I researched bird diseases online, looking for explanations. I set up a wildlife camera pointed at the feeders, hopping to catch whatever was happening. The footage showed nothing, just birds feeding normally, flying away healthy. And then dying. On Saturday morning, I found Romeo. He was lying beneath the feeder, his brilliant red feathers dulled by death, his eyes closed like he was sleeping. I knelt beside him and felt something break inside my chest, something that had been holding together by sheer will and spite. I picked him up carefully, cradling his small body in my hands, and I cried for the first time since Derek left. I cried for the bird, for my marriage, for every loss that had stacked up like stones on my back. When I finally stopped, I looked up and saw Margaret watching from her kitchen window. She was just standing there, perfectly still, her face expressionless. Our eyes met, and she smiled. Not the fake, performative smile she usually wore. This was different. This was satisfied, victorious. I buried Romeo in the garden next to the others, marking his grave with a smooth river stone I'd kept from a vacation Melissa and Jason had loved when they were little. Then I called the police. Officer Martinez was young and sympathetic, but ultimately useless. "I understand you're upset, ma'am," he said, standing in my backyard with his notepad. "But unless you have proof that someone deliberately harmed these birds, there's not much we can do. Birds die. It's sad, but it's nature." 7 birds in 1 week isn't nature, I said, my voice tight. That's deliberate. "Do you have any evidence? Anything on your wildlife camera?" I showed him the footage. Birds feeding, birds flying away, birds being birds, nothing suspicious, nothing actionable. "What about poison?" I asked. "Can you test the seed, the water?" "That would require a warrant, and honestly, ma'am, judges don't issue warrants based on dead birds. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." After he left, I sat on my back deck and stared at the feeders, at the bird bath, at the dogwood tree where Romeo and Juliet had built their nest. The nest was empty now. Juliet hadn't returned since Romeo died. I thought about taking it all down. The feeders, the bath, everything. It would be easier, safer for the birds that remained. Margaret would win, but at least nothing else would die. But then I thought about Romeo, about the way he'd looked at me that first morning, about the joy he'd brought, about the fact that Margaret had taken that joy and killed it, literally, just because she could. No, I wasn't taking anything down. I was going to war. Sunday morning, I collected samples from all 3 feeders, carefully scooping the contents into labeled Ziploc bags. Then I drove 40 minutes to a veterinary clinic that specialized in exotic birds, the kind of place that people drove hours to reach when their parrots got sick. Dr. Sarah Chen met me in the lobby, a petite woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and hands that moved with practiced gentleness as she examined the seed samples. "You think someone poisoned them?" she asked, spreading the seed across her examination table. "I know someone did. I just need to prove it." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "This will take a few days. We'll need to run a full toxicology screen. It's not cheap." "I don't care what it costs." The test came back on Wednesday. Negative, the seed was clean. "Then it has to be the water," I said, standing in her office with a new sample from the bird bath. Dr. Chen tested it on Thursday, also negative. "Mrs. Patterson," she said gently, "sometimes birds just die. Windows, predators, disease." All 7 had broken necks. That's not disease. "It could be a cat or—" "She's doing something, I know it." Dr. Chen studied me with concern that was probably meant to be kind, but felt like pity. "Have you considered talking to someone?" she asked carefully. "A counselor, maybe. Loss can manifest in—" "I'm not crazy." "I didn't say you were, but grief does strange things to people. I see it all the time with pet owners who—" "These aren't pets, they're wild birds, and someone is killing them. Thank you for your time." I walked out before she could say anything else. The next 3 days, I barely slept. I spent every daylight hour watching the feeders, my wildlife camera recording continuously, my phone ready to document anything suspicious. I researched bird poisoning methods, finding horrifying forums where people discussed ways to eliminate nuisance birds without detection. At night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, wondering if Margaret was out there doing something to the feeders while I slept. I started checking them at 2 a.m., then 4 a.m., then every hour. I lost track of time, of eating, of everything except the need to catch her. Melissa called on Saturday morning. "Mom, you sound terrible. Are you sick?" "I'm fine, just busy." "Busy with what?" I almost told her everything. About the birds, about Margaret, about the growing certainty that I was being gaslit by a woman who treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom. But I could hear the worry in Melissa's voice, the same worry that had been there since the divorce, and I couldn't add to it. "Just yard work," I said. "The garden's taking more time than I thought." "Maybe you should slow down, take a break. Maybe come visit us for a week." Jason and I were talking, and we thought. "I can't leave right now. There's too much to do." "Mom." "I'm fine, honey, really. I need to go. There's something boiling on the stove." There wasn't, but she let me go, and I sat in the silence of my kitchen and hated myself for lying to my daughter. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center, a bland building with fluorescent lights and chairs that squeaked when you moved. I arrived early and sat in the back row, my folder of documentation thick with printed photos, veterinary reports, and a detailed timeline of every bird death. I'd prepared a speech, practiced it until I could deliver it without my voice shaking. Margaret arrived at 6:55, impeccable as always, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She took her position at the front table and arranged her papers with the precision of someone preparing for battle. The meeting started with routine business, discussion of next quarter's landscaping budget, approval of the new neighborhood watch coordinator, debate about whether the community pool needed resurfacing this year or could wait until next. Margaret ran it like a corporate board meeting, her voice calm and authoritative, her parliamentary procedure flawless. I watched her command the room and felt my stomach tighten. "Finally," she said, checking her agenda, "we have a matter of ongoing concern regarding wildlife management and property standards. Mrs. Patterson, would you like to address the board?" I stood, folder in hand, and walked to the front. 37 people watched me, neighbors I'd never spoken to, faces I recognized from passing waves and polite nods. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I want to address the concerns that have been raised about my bird feeders." I opened my folder and began distributing copies of my documentation, photos of the feeders, proof that they were all on my property, measurements showing they weren't visible from the street. "These feeders are fully compliant with HOA regulations," I continued. "I've reviewed the bylaws extensively. There's no rule against bird feeders, no restriction on wildlife attraction on private property, and no basis for the citations I've received." Margaret's smile didn't waver. "Mrs. Patterson, while I appreciate your enthusiasm for local wildlife, the issue isn't compliance with written rules. It's about community standards and the impact your choices have on your neighbors." "What impact? Can you name one specific measurable impact?" "Noise, mess, property value degradation. These are documented concerns." "Documented by who?" Margaret gestured to a man in the third row, Bill Henderson, who lived 4 houses down and whom I'd never actually met. "Mr. Henderson has filed multiple complaints about excessive bird noise during early morning hours," Margaret said. Bill Henderson looked uncomfortable. "Well, I mean, there are a lot of birds now, more than there used to be." "Do they wake you up?" I asked him directly. "Not exactly, but they're loud sometimes. Louder than the landscaping crews, louder than your neighbors' pool parties." He shifted in his seat. "I guess not, but Margaret said." "Margaret said what?" "That you were creating a nuisance, that property values were being affected." I turned back to Margaret. "Do you have any evidence that property values are being affected?" "Common sense suggests." "Common sense isn't evidence. Do you have appraisals, comparative market analysis, anything concrete?" Her smile tightened. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're going through a difficult transition. Divorce is never easy, and sometimes we make questionable choices when we're feeling vulnerable. This obsession with birds, with confrontation, with refusing to be a team player, these are all signs that perhaps you need support, professional support. The room went silent. Are you seriously suggesting I need therapy because I put up bird feeders? I'm suggesting that your behavior has been erratic, hostile. Several neighbors have expressed concern about your well-being. Which neighbors? That's confidential. Of course it is, because they don't exist. Margaret's facade cracked slightly. Mrs. Patterson, this is not an attack. This is an intervention. We care about you. We want what's best for the community, which includes you. Then let me keep my bird feeders. I'm afraid that's not possible. The board has voted. When did the board vote? This morning. Emergency session. We determined that your feeders constitute a health and safety hazard and must be removed within 7 days, or the HOA will be forced to take legal action. I stared at her. You held an emergency board meeting without notifying me. Notification is only required for general meetings. Board meetings are executive sessions. That's convenient. That's protocol. She stood, gathering her papers. I'm sorry it's come to this, Mrs. Patterson, but rules exist for a reason. You have 7 days. This meeting is adjourned. I didn't remove the feeders. Instead, I called an attorney. His name was Robert Chen. No relation to the veterinarian, he assured me, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was 40 minutes away, in a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and ambition. HOAs have significant legal authority, he explained, sitting across from me in his cluttered office. But that authority isn't unlimited. If you're on solid legal ground, and from what you've told me you are, they can't force you to remove something that's compliant with the bylaws. So I can fight this. You can, but it's expensive. HOA litigation can drag on for months, sometimes years. Legal fees accumulate quickly, and even if you win, you'll still have to live next to these people. I don't care, I'm not backing down. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Okay, let me review the bylaws and the board meeting minutes. I'll need copies of all the citations, your documentation, everything. We'll start with a formal cease and desist letter, then see how they respond. And the birds that died. Unless you can prove deliberate poisoning, that's a separate issue. Possibly criminal, but hard to prosecute without evidence. So she gets away with it. For now, but if she's as vindictive as you say, she'll make another mistake. People like that always do. Margaret's response to the cease and desist arrived 5 days later via certified mail. It was 5 pages long, single-spaced, and referenced 17 different sections of the HOA bylaws, 3 state statutes, and 1 case from 1987 about a property dispute involving roosters in suburban Denver. The summary: remove the feeders or face a lawsuit and daily fines of $100. She's bluffing, Robert said when I called him. Her legal arguments are weak. The rooster case isn't even relevant. Roosters are livestock, not wild birds. She doesn't care about legal arguments. She wants to bankrupt me into submission. Then we countersue: harassment, abuse of authority. We can make this very expensive for the HOA. How expensive for me? Silence. That's what I thought, I said. The fines started the next day. $100 per day, automatically added to my HOA account. By the end of the week, I owed $700 in noncompliance penalties. I stopped opening the mail. The birds were still dying, 3 more in the second week. I found them at different times, morning, afternoon, evening, always beneath the feeders, always with broken necks. I stopped burying them in the garden. Instead, I put them in the freezer, labeled and dated, in case I ever found proof I'd need them for evidence. Melissa called again. Mom, Jason and I want to come visit next weekend. We're worried about you. Don't be, I'm fine. You don't sound fine, you sound, I don't know, distant. I'm just tired, work has been crazy. Another lie, I'd barely gone to work in 2 weeks. My boss had called twice asking if everything was okay. I'd said yes, more lies. The truth was I couldn't think about anything except the birds and Margaret, and the growing certainty that I was losing a war I hadn't wanted to fight. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning at 3:47 a.m. I'd set up a second wildlife camera. This one pointed at a different angle, capturing not just the feeders but also the property line and part of Margaret's yard. I was reviewing the footage when I saw it, a shadow moving across my backyard at 3:12 a.m., too large to be a cat, too purposeful to be random. I rewound, zoomed in, enhanced the image as much as the cheap camera would allow. Margaret. She was wearing dark clothes, moving quickly but carefully. She approached the dogwood tree, reached up to the feeder, and did something I couldn't quite see. Then she retreated back to her yard, glancing around once before disappearing into the darkness. My hands shook as I saved the footage, backed it up to 3 different drives, and emailed it to Robert Chen with the subject line, "Evidence." He called me at 8:03 a.m. "This is good," he said, "but it's not conclusive. We can't see what she's doing to the feeder." "She's poisoning them, she has to be." "Probably, but probably doesn't hold up in court. We need more. Can you set up additional cameras, better quality ones?" "How much will that cost?" "A few $100s for good ones, or," he paused, "there might be another option." "What?" "Set a trap. If she's tampering with the feeders, catch her in the act. Multiple cameras, good lighting, irrefutable evidence." "And then we go to the police with proof of criminal mischief, possibly animal cruelty. The HOA can't protect her from criminal charges." I spent $600 on cameras, money I didn't have, charged to a credit card that was already carrying too much balance. I positioned 4 of them around the feeders, set them to record continuously, and added motion-activated lights that would illuminate the entire area if anything larger than a cat approached. Then I waited. Margaret didn't come that night, or the next. On the 3rd night at 2:43 a.m., the motion lights blazed to life. I was at my kitchen window in seconds, my phone already dialing 911, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Margaret was standing at the dogwood tree, something small and white in her hand, a container of some kind. She was shaking it over the feeder, deliberate and methodical, when the lights hit her. She froze, her head snapping toward my house, her eyes wide with surprise that morphed instantly into fury. "I see you," I shouted through the window. "I'm calling the police." She didn't run. Instead, she walked directly toward my house, still carrying the container, her face twisted into something I'd never seen before, rage stripped of its polite disguise. "You want to play games?" she screamed. "You think you can win against me? I've destroyed people better than you." The 911 operator was asking questions I couldn't process. "She's on my property," I shouted into the phone. "She's poisoning my birds. Send someone now." Margaret was at my back door, pounding on it with one fist, still holding the container with the other. "Open this door. We're going to settle this right now." "The police are coming," I yelled back. "Everything is on camera. You're done." She stopped pounding, looked directly at the nearest camera, and smiled, that same satisfied smile from before. "Prove it," she said. Then she walked back to her house, taking the container with her, moving with the casual confidence of someone who knew they'd already won. The police arrived 12 minutes later. By then, Margaret was back in her house, all lights off, no answer when they knocked on her door. Officer Martinez, the same cop from before, took my statement while his partner reviewed the camera footage. "We can see her approaching your property," he said. "And we can see her with a container, but we can't see what's in it, and we didn't catch her in possession when we arrived. Did you see what she was putting in the feeder?" "No, but it has to be poison. It's the only explanation." Has to be and is are different things. We can follow up with her tomorrow, ask some questions, but without physical evidence. The birds are evidence. I have 11 dead birds in my freezer. The 2 officers exchanged glances. "Ma'am," Martinez said carefully, "storing dead birds in your freezer isn't normal behavior." "I kept them for evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Birds die. And honestly, this whole situation, the cameras, the late-night surveillance, confronting your neighbor at 3 a.m., it's starting to look less like she's harassing you and more like